Alright, today we're going to be going over a couple examples of problems with square roots and different powers and how we would solve them using algebra. First question we're going to go over is just a simple solve for x problem. And we can do this with fairly basic algebra. You have the square root of x minus 3 is equal to 6. The first step that you always want to do is isolate x, which means that we want to get everything with x on one side and everything that isn't x on the other. So now, if we add 3 to both sides, what we end up with is the square root of x is equal to 9. So now, we have everything with x on the other side and everything that isn't x on the other side. The next step is to get the power of x to equal 1. And that just gives us x by ourselves. So if we have a square root, how do we undo a square root? Well, we can square it, and that'll just give us x. But what we do to one side, you have to do to the other side. So if we square both sides, we just end up with x is equal to 81. This is a very simple example, so we're going to go over another one that's just a little bit more complicated. We have x to the power of 3 over 2 is equal to 8. Now we're going to take this very step by step, same thing as we did before. Step 1 is everything with x on one side and everything that isn't x on the other. Yes, we've already done that. So now we want to work to get this power of x to be equal to 1. When you put something to a power, it's really the same as multiplying the exponent. So the first thing we can do, we can get rid of this 2 on the bottom if we square this. If we square one side, we have to square the other side. So what we end up with is x to the power of 3 over 2 times 2, and 8 squared gives us 64. So we actually end up with x to the 3 equals 64. Now we're not quite done because we still want to find out what x is. And we can do this simply by taking the cube root, which is the same thing as putting it to the power of 1 over 3. So when we do x to the power of 1 over 3, what we end up with is x to the 3 times 1 over 3, which just ends up being 1, is equal to the cube root of 64. You can plug this into your calculator or recognize that 64 is actually just 4 times 4 times 4. So the cube root of 64 is 4, which gives us our final answer of x equals 4. So that's how we deal with it when the powers aren't just a square root, when you have a fractional power. This next problem we're going to deal with is a little bit tricky because we're not going to end up with a nice clean solution like we normally do. We've got x to the power of 1/3 is equal to 4x squared. So just like before, the first thing we want to do is get all the x's to one side. So I'm going to take both sides and divide it by x squared. When you divide by an exponent, it's really the same as subtracting. So we end up with 1/3 minus 2, which is going to give us negative 5 over 3. So on this side, we're going to have x to the negative 5 over 3 is equal to 4. So now we have everything containing x on one side and everything else on the other. We now want to work to get this power of x to be 1. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put both sides to the power of 3. And what that gives us is x to the negative 5 over 3 times 3 is equal to 64. Now these 3's cancel, and what we get is x to the negative 5 is equal to 64. And now the way that we can wrap this up here is how do we turn negative 5 into 1 is by putting this all to the power of negative 1 over 5. So So to the power of negative 1 over 5. And what this gives us is x is equal to 64 to the power of negative 1 over 5. Now this doesn't look like a super clean answer. And when we punch it into our calculator, give me 1 second to do that, we see that this is actually equal to approximately 0.435 ... So it doesn't give us quite a clean answer. The final problem we're going to go over here is when we're dealing with a function and we're trying to figure out what that function is. Say we're given something like x squared plus 3, or y squared plus 3 is equal to x to the 4. We don't really recognize what this function would look like because we have a y squared, and we're always used to just seeing y. So we're trying to solve for y. The first thing we do, make sure that everything on one side is y, and everything else is on the other side. So if we subtract 3 from both sides, we're going to get y squared is equal to x to the 4 minus 3. Now from here, it's pretty easy to isolate for y. All we do is take the square root of both sides. So we end up with our final answer of y is equal to the square root of x to the 4 minus 3, which is a function that we can try to graph or put in some points. It's easier to work with than y squared plus 3 is x to the 4. So that's how we do that, and that's a couple questions that we just worked through.